Welcome to American Zarathustra. This is episode 44 of Imperium Art. Today is a new milestone for the Imperium Art documentary. I'm particularly excited about this episode because we have as our guest one of the most important influencers in white identity politics. Our guest's intelligence, eloquence, and vigor for our movement is exemplary. I was on his show recently with Jeff Winston of the White Art Collective, and we're very excited to try to keep the momentum going with the discussion on how to get the arts more connected to our movement. So you can find him at patrioticalternative.org. It is my honor to introduce Mark Collett. How are you today, sir?
Hello, thank you for such a very, very kind introduction. I am very well, thanks. It's a little bit late here, but I am very, very happy to be with you, and I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion.
Marvelous, marvelous. And also my steadfast co-host and good friend, Nullus. How are you today, Nullus?
Hello, Donald, and it's an honor to have you with us, Mark, and hello to the audience.
Wonderful. So we always like to kind of advocate for people new to the show or people who may not know our guests. So I just want to start off with a bit of an introduction. If you could tell us about your accomplishments, Mark, over the years and what direction Patriotic Alternative will be heading to in the future.
Well, thank you. A lot of people will know me. Some of you might not know me. I've been involved in the cause for over 2 decades now. I have previously been involved with the British National Party. I was their youth leader around the year 2000. And then I went on to be their head of publicity and play a very important role in the production of their propaganda in their most important and largest electoral victories. After the demise of the British National Party, I've worked with numerous other political parties, both in terms of producing publicity and in terms of helping with fundraising. And after that, I started a YouTube account in around 2016 after I played an important role in the Brexit referendum.
Mm-hmm.
And since then, I have been producing a number of different videos discussing many different things, and people kept saying to me that they wanted a real-life ethno-nationalist movement here in the UK, something that reflected the growing sentiment of sort of pushback against the demographic changes happening here in the UK. And I started Patriotic Alternative with Laura Towler in 2019, and since then we've been full steam ahead attempting to raise awareness about demographic change and, most importantly, building a positive ethno-nationalist community.
Mm-hmm. We have a very strong relationship with our fellow artists and musicians in the UK at the White Art Collective. And so now we have, I believe, a Patriotic Arts Collective in the UK as well. Do you know anything about that and what's going on in the art scene in our movement in the UK?
Well, I've known Jeff for quite some time, and I've had Jeff on Patriotic Weekly Review 3 times now. And the White Art Collective was something that I was always a massive, massive fan of. I believe the White Art Collective to be extremely important. I believe it's something that is absolutely necessary. And I can go into that a bit more in a bit more detail later. But here in the UK, there's a lot of people who are drawn to nationalism, who are artistic, who have an artistic nature, whether that be they're interested in singing, they're interested in dancing, they're interested in traditional art, interested in digital art, but they've all been drawn to the nationalist cause, and they're very, very passionate about both art and nationalism, and they want to express their artistic flair by producing art that reflects their nationalist beliefs. And because of that, I was approached by someone who calls himself the Patriot. I actually know him in real life.
Okay.
He's a good friend of mine, and he wanted to bring people together in the UK who were part of Patriotic Alternative, who were part of an ethno-nationalist force here in the UK, and get them together on a regular basis. And I'll talk a bit about what they do later if you wish. And get them active, get them talking to each other, get them working together, get them producing material together for a common cause around common themes. And I think that's been a real success because it's grown very, very rapidly. And it's something that we showcase on our monthly PA streams because we think it's just so important. I think the arts is something that it's absolutely paramount that we capture and that we foster a good relationship with artistic people in the ethno-nationalist movement.
Well, obviously, we couldn't agree more, and so it's just a thrill to be connecting with you, and then more with artists in the UK and beyond. That's a kind of a future vision for us here at the White Art Collective and Imperium Art, is to kind of bridge the language barrier. Pretty soon, we're going to have a discussion with our friend in Paris, France, Flash Gorgon, who the art right is what he calls his brand. And so we want to push that and stretch out more. But I'm interested in this discussion about the themes and the what makes it an art movement per se. Now, nationalism is obviously the spirit. We know what our problems are. We're all aware of the crisis that we're facing in the West. And so we all have our separate and unique mediums and voice per se in our art styles. Is there anything that you see happening just from your perspective that unifies all of these arts as sort of a white positive art movement?
Well, I think the artistic nature or the artistic spirit that Western people have is very, very unique, and it's very, very defining for our people. And if you go to traditional art galleries and you look at traditional art, or even if you take a wander through any major city centre in just say the UK, but any European city, I should say most. There are some planned cities which are completely bereft of art, but any major city that was established naturally, say pre the 1900s, you can see just how artistic Europeans were, and you can see our artistic flair all over. It's imprinted on the cities, it's imprinted on buildings, it's imprinted on both the interior and exterior of those buildings. You can marvel at so many things. One thing that always amazes me is if you're walking through these major cities and you look at old buildings, just the beautiful flourishes of art around doorways, around windows. You can look at these things and you could say they are pointless in terms of the actual structure of the building. And they're certainly something you wouldn't see on, say, soulless Soviet influenced architecture, because these things are just there to be beautiful. They are just there to show off the artistic flair of the planet. They're just there to make the building look beautiful. And why did Europeans do that? Well, Europeans were very much wedded to art, very much wedded to making things look magnificent, look beautiful. And these items of beauty weren't just locked behind closed doors in art galleries. They were everywhere. Fountains, buildings, entranceways, statues. They were there to enrich people's lives, to inspire people, to make people feel better, to uplift entire societies and communities. But I think there is a turning point in history, and I would say that's probably around the 1950s or 60s, where you stopped seeing this, where art either was completely absent from new buildings or planned cities, or instead of being that beautiful traditional art which is uplifting, the art you saw was kind of perverse, strange, debased modern art that certainly doesn't uplift anyone. It's there, it does exist, but it doesn't have the same effect on human beings as the kind of art that I'm talking about. And I think that's very, very important, because it's another example of how our enemies have taken something away from us, something that's uniquely European, and they've taken that away from us. And they've either left us with a complete absence of what was there before, or replaced what they've taken away with something that doesn't have the same effect, with something that's completely debased, odd, perverse, which certainly doesn't feed and nourish the soul like traditional art does.
We know that, part of the kind of Marxist philosophy is to divorce people from their history and break them off from their identities. And perhaps this is one way in which that happens. I don't know how intentional that is. There's probably a lot of factors involved in it, but the statement here seems to be that beauty and aesthetics are a part of the European soul. And once you break that away, if we do not live in an aesthetic and beautiful environment where we're reflecting back who we are and our history, etc., then it's injurious to our spirit in some way. Would you agree?
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
As I was saying, these things, this art that we used to see, whether it be in art galleries, whether it be on buildings, statues, fountains, it doesn't matter. It was food for the soul. It made European people feel better. It lifted people up. There's something about walking around a beautiful city. I mean, the fact that we used to go sightseeing, and when I say sightseeing, you would walk around or see people walking around with cameras, just taking pictures of cities, taking pictures of buildings which are there for maybe a very mundane reason. They're just a bank or a building that a business would find itself occupying. These aren't necessarily special buildings. They're not government buildings. They're not necessarily anything like a church. Like you could say, like a church is built to be beautiful because it's built to inspire people because it's a religious building. But you can walk around, say, the banking sector of a northern city and see some incredible buildings, statues, artwork, little flourishes, little wonderful, beautiful parts of buildings, overhanging corners or archways that people will stop and take pictures of, that tourists will take pictures of. And these were designed in this way, I believe, so that European people who lived in these cities absolutely felt uplifted in their daily life. And I think those things make people feel better. Whereas if you walk around, say, a 1960s architectural mess, they are completely devoid of soul. And I think that is, like you said, done for a reason. It's done to take away inspiration from people, to leave people devoid of spiritual nourishment. And I think this has been something that's been done absolutely knowingly. I think this has been done for good reason. These people want to take away anything from us that connects us with something that is spiritually nourishing. They want to take us away from anything that can inspire us, from anything that makes us realize that we're higher beings, that we're special, that we have a greater purpose in life. And I talked earlier just slightly about how you often see these on, in city centres. Well, people will often talk about the soulless nature of going to work, the 9-to-5 grind, capitalism. And indeed, that's a good point. But the fact that our ancestors used to make these buildings that we would go and work in beautiful in little ways and do little things to make people feel better about going there, or to make our cities feel like they had a soul, because often I feel more at home in the countryside than I do the city. But our ancestors knew this and they tried to inject soul and spirit into them. That says a lot about who we were. And the fact these buildings are devoid of that now says a lot about who we are, what we've become, and who's now in charge of society. So you look at old buildings in London and compare them to these new glass-fronted buildings. I don't think anyone could argue that these new glass-fronted buildings make people feel better than those old, beautiful, painstakingly designed buildings of the past.
This really is a call to our artists to do more public art, more public works. We have magazines, we've got websites, YouTube, we've got music, poetry. We've got all kinds of great media, but that was one question I answered recently on a show that I was interviewed on. What's your your big dream? And I said architecture, and that's everything you just said is the reason why. I had this discussion with Kai Moros some time ago, trying to get him on the show. He's so shy, and he was saying he would want to talk about architecture, and there's just not enough discussion about that. It's so critical to our Western biospirit. Nullus, I think I'd like to hand you the mic because I know that you've lived in Europe for some time and you probably have quite a lot to add.
Well, to begin with, it's absolutely correct. I mean, you live in an environment where you're organically connected to that environment. When you wake up in the morning, you open your window, you look out the door, look out the window. Everyone around you, everyone outside is a part of your extended family in a sense, even though you might not consciously acknowledge that, but that's what it is. And you also go to work in an environment where you know that your ancestors were a part of this creation. So it's this continuity that you're preserving or that you're acknowledging as you go about your day wherever you are in a European city. You feel it. I can say that whenever I travel to Europe, if I go to Hungary, if I go to Austria, then I will feel all of this. It enriches my spirit. It nourishes my spirit in many ways. And when then you see a modernist building somewhere stuck between these, let's say, two, a Baroque and a Rococo building, you'll see this like modern monstrosity stuck right in between the two. It turns you off. It sort of becomes this kind of weird sense of it's a void. It's an emptiness. It's very sterile, and it doesn't really offer much in terms of I don't even know if the word spiritual is good in that sense, but perhaps maybe that would be a good word for it. But even in the everyday sense, it just gives you a sense of family. It's like you're building your own house and you have your own place to live, and then and you feel comfortable there. I think that would be the best way of explaining it. I did want to, if it's all right with you, Donald, I did want to read just a slight passage as it relates to this from the Imperium Art essay and see what Mark thinks about that. Would that be all right, Donald?
Please do. Please do.
So this is from the beginning of the first part of the essay. Imperium art openly repudiates tropes of materialism, secularism, and nihilism by realigning the aesthetic validity to what Rochlitz calls the aesthetics of the sublime, thus reconnecting the soul of man and the work of art with the metaphysical essence it embodies. Nevertheless, it remains important to balance the artistic creation with the reality of nature within the understanding of the transcendental experience of the divine. Thomas philosopher Jacques Maritain argued that immoral men can create timeless works of art, and artists should not focus on morality in their art. Instead, the only artistic goal should be the pursuit of beauty. Maritain explained that beauty is transcendental, and God is subsistent beauty, where the artist consciously or unconsciously pursues a predetermined path toward the divine. According to Maritain, this is not based on rational knowledge, rather than an innate inclination toward God. Regardless of the motivations of the artist, any great work of aesthetic beauty touches the face of the divine. As T.S. Eliot correctly stated, however, aesthetics alone is not adequate. Lack of aesthetics can break the morale of even the most spiritual among us, and there will always remain a direct correlation between the sublime and the beautiful. Imperium art presents a path toward appreciating the beauty of our ancient European heritage by presenting the immortal values of divinity and nation as the centerpiece of the cathartic experience. Imperium art does not intend to replace religion. It seeks harmony with the metaphysical traditions that define Western kind through the aesthetic value of its art. I hope that wasn't too much of a mouthful, Mark.
No, that was very well written. Could you repeat the quote by T.S. Eliot? Because I thought that was particularly poignant.
Yes, this is so here, T.S. Eliot, I didn't quote him directly, but he did state that aesthetics alone is not adequate. Lack of aesthetics can break the morale of even the most spiritual among us, and there will always remain a direct correlation
No,
between
that was the bit that I liked. The lack of aesthetics can break the will of the most spiritual among us.
Yeah.
And I think it's very interesting that he said that, break the will. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at buildings which are the most utilitarian, that are the most lacking in spirit, should you say, or the most generic, you would say a prison. You would say a prison is built for largely a singular purpose to hold
Exactly.
people inside them, and they're not meant to be beautiful. They're not meant to be inspiring. They're meant to house as many people as possible in a place where everything is built simply so that those people exist. They exist in a state which isn't there to inspire. It isn't there to uplift. I'm not saying it's necessarily there to break their spirit, but it's not there to uplift their spirit. It's there so they're just packed in and they essentially can't get out. And if you think about the way that modern buildings are designed, are we being trapped in prisons? Are we being sent to work in sort of modern day poorhouses? Are we being surrounded by these structures that make it feel like we're living in a prison? And that is a genuine question, because some people do feel like that. Some people say, they feel trapped in the modern world, that they don't feel inspired, that they want to escape from the modern world. Well, you want to escape from a prison, don't you? And I think that T.S. Eliot quote is very, very important, because again, when you look at something that Donald said earlier about 1960s buildings, you have this Soviet era architecture. What do people say it's like? Like prison blocks. These tower blocks are like prison blocks. They are large, soulless buildings. They have these sharp edges. They're built to be absolutely utilitarian. They're there for a reason, and for a reason alone, and they serve their purpose, but they do nothing more than that. Whereas the buildings that I was talking earlier, they serve their purpose, but they serve numerous other purposes, and they do things to make the inhabitants of those buildings and the people who pass them every day feel better. And I think we often talk about the European spirit, about that something extra, that's something that defines us, and all different people have their own particular bio spirit. But the European spirit, I think, is wedded particularly to art. It's wedded to a certain artistic nature that uplifts, that inspires, that makes us feel more, that we are more. And I think there has been a conscious effort to take that away from us. And I know that people in the chat, I'm not sure whether this is live, it's on YouTube, but people may say, well, how are we going to fight back against that? How can we push back against that when we're so small compared to the system? We're not exactly the people who are going to be designing the next set of buildings or the next city or town centre. We're not town planners. And I know we're not. And that is very unfortunate. But I think you can fight back against this in small ways in your everyday life. You can fight back against this by expressing yourself in just the smallest ways. I'll give you an example. I always remember when my mum used to bake apple pies. Now, obviously, baking can be a form of art. There are culinary arts as well as traditional arts, as well as art in architecture, etc. And I always used to remember when she used to bake an apple pie, on top of the pie, she would always decorate it, and she would always, with the last bits of pastry, make 4 leaves which would sit on top of the pie as a decoration. And I know that sounds like something very small, but that was just an example of how somebody in their everyday life would actually do something that was artistic, that would go that little step further. There is absolutely no need for those 4 little leaves on top of the apple pie. They don't make the pie taste better. They don't improve the pie in any culinary sense. They just make the pie look nicer. They are just a little artistic flourish that the baker uses, that the cook uses to make the pie look more beautiful. But why do we as European people do that? We do it with buildings. We do it with our food. We do it in numerous ways, but all these little ways are expressions of us. They're things that we do to make our people feel better, whether they're sitting down to eat a slice of apple pie or whether they're walking past a building that people go to work in, or people, banking, or people shopping. It doesn't matter. We do these things, and they are indicative of us as a people.
I can speak so much to this. I was on Jason Kuna's The After Party, and speaking about an article that I wrote was published in the White People's Quarterly about postmodernism. And I'm an art teacher, a professional artist. My whole background is in the arts. And so I understand funding for the arts, and I understand how the arts as a sort of a propaganda business works, at least in the United States. And it's very, very clearly worse than everything that we've been talking about. Not only do we have these kind of sterile environments where we don't see our own identity reflected back to us, but where there are the arts, in public or private, wherever, that galleries or displays, etc., it's always funded towards kind of an anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-Western civilization theme. It's all essentially LGBT and Black Lives Matter and all these, whatever those things are. But so long as you're anti-white, anti-Christian, and anti-Western, then you'll get funding. And that's the way that business works. It's very, very dark in terms of like the context of this conversation. But that obviously is, I'm not trying to blackpill everybody. I'm essentially just saying this is kind of what we're up against. We have to reinvent, or rather invent, our own arts world. And, we talk about we don't have funding to make buildings and design cities and do something on a grandiose scale. The internet is our city. That's kind of how I'm looking at it for now. I'm very grateful for the publishing platforms that we have, and the YouTube platforms, et cetera, wherever that we are. But this is one of the main questions that we want to try to struggle with you, Mark, is to try to think through what can we do to grow, strengthen, fortify, and expand the arts in our movement. So this brings me back to you had a show recently with myself and Jeff Winston on your channel, and I was wondering what was the objective of that show, because of course you also had people from the UK art scene. What were some of the objectives you had? And I'm trying to get a sense of where you'd like to go with that momentum.
Well, I think what Jeff's done is absolutely fantastic. What the White Art Collective have done is amazing. And I love the way it encompasses, it's a genuine collective. It encompasses more than just traditional art. It encompasses more than just music. It encompasses so many different artistic fields. It's absolutely fantastic. And the hard work and dedication that's gone into building that is just incredible. And I take my hat off to Jeff and other members of the White Art Collective. I've talked before about how there are certain musicians, certain singers that have uplifted me, but I also like looking at the new sort of digital art that is produced by our artists. And we want to do something similar here in the UK. And I found that art is so important in our everyday life. I mean, I'm putting artists in touch with, say, business owners, with people who are undertaking projects such as writing, putting a digital artist in charge with, say, a writer is something really important. It's something that helps both. And that's why these collectives are important. So you have a wonderful, wonderful artist who produces incredible music. And music is incredibly uplifting. Music is something that really can raise your spirits. You can be down in the dumps, you can feel defeated, you can feel depressed, but listening to the right music, listening to a beautiful composition or a wonderful singer can actually make you feel better about yourself when you're going through a terrible time. But that singer, that artist, that composer often needs artwork. They need traditional artwork. They need something that accompanies their vocal talents, their compositional talents, to produce their album artwork, to be the packaging for what they do. And putting people in touch who are from different artistic fields is so, so important. And I'll give you an example of how this works in the business world as well. Laura Towler, as we all know, launched the incredible Grandma Towler's tea. And Grandma Towler's tea is a wonderful, wonderful idea. It's a nationalist taking back the power from big corporations. It's a nationalist producing a product which absolutely can be used on a daily basis by nationalists. This isn't something like producing it, and I'm not against people producing merchandise, but if you produce a t-shirt or a mug with a logo on it, that's great, nothing wrong with that. But they're things that people don't need to buy on a weekly basis. You don't need to buy a new mug every single day of every single week or every single day of the week. You buy a mug maybe, I don't know, every 6 months, every year. I can't remember. I think the last time I had a new mug bought for me was last year on Father's Day. Or was it? It's sometime, but it's got pictures of my daughter on it, and my partner had it made for me. But I don't get mugs very often. They're not things that I order on a weekly basis. So people who produce these things, great, but they're not things that you use on a daily basis. But tea is. People drink multiple cups of tea a day. I think I might have had 2 cups of tea today. Some days I have more. So somebody producing a nationalist brew, a nationalist tea, is a great idea, because it's something that people will use on a daily basis and can substitute. They can substitute the nationalist product for a similar product produced by a large global, soulless globalist corporation. And that's great. But if you're producing tea, you need packaging. You need artwork for that packaging. You need a design. You need a logo. You need something that you can put on your packaging. You need something for your branding. And those things are massively, massively important. And this is just a small way that artistic groups in the nationalist cause, or artists around the nationalist cause, can help in a massive, massive way that is basically absolutely necessary. Laura couldn't have launched Grandma Towler's tea without the help of a very, very talented artist here in the UK called Albion Doe. She helped Laura with all of the designs, with the drawings, and it helped Laura launch what has become an incredibly successful business. And what we're doing here in the UK with the patriotic art community, and I'm sure Jeff is doing something similar with that elsewhere, is put people in touch who can do that. Put artists in touch with business owners. And there are a wealth of nationalist business owners out there. There are a wealth of industrious nationalists who own their own businesses, who have great ideas, who are entrepreneurs. And putting them in touch with nationalist artists is a wonderful way of building a community. And I often talk about other ethnicities. Let's take, say, for example, Muslims here in the UK. Muslims in the UK have this policy of keeping money within their community.
Sure.
They have a policy of keeping money to themselves. So if a Muslim wants his MOT doing on his car, he will look for a Muslim garage, a Muslim MOT station. If a Muslim wants to buy groceries, they will go to a local grocer's. And if you go to Muslim areas, I'm not saying there are no supermarkets around Muslim areas. There are. I'm not saying you don't see Muslims in supermarkets, but they still have their own local greengrocers and butchers, etc. And they try to keep their money within their community. So their money circulates amongst them, and they're constantly helping each other out. They're constantly helping out members of their community, people they see as brothers and sisters, people they see as extended family. And we can do the same. If somebody opens a nationalist business or provides goods and services that nationalists need on a daily basis, that is fantastic. But if our artists, if our talented art community can benefit from that, again, it's another way of extending our ability to keep our money amongst ourselves, to help build a community of like-minded people that don't just physically and morally support each other, but actually financially support each other too.
So this helps to meet the objectives of this show here. We're coming up with ideas somehow or other. This is like a directive for us to create, say, a directory of nationalist businesses where we can, again, create our own economy, or we can do just as you said. Nullus actually has some points that relate to his essay on this, so I'm going to pass the mic to him quickly.
Yes, I think that what you were just saying, Mark, perfectly reflects the passage that I wrote on the collaboration of the continuum through the Imperium. Imperium must be understood as a plane of artistic consciousness that encompasses every element of the underlying foundation of organic nationalism. The European ethnos represents the bonds of unity and convergence. The European mythos is the wellspring from which the art draws inspiration, and the European logos is the only way in which Imperium art is expressed. These sources are understood through the component national cultures that have made Europe and the Europeans the most successful civilization in human history. Above these components lies the realization of unity through the Imperium, where Europeans can enrich each other with their respective organic identities. Imperium art creates awareness where Europeans find common solidarity through the Imperium and attempts to bridge a gap among the various interpretations of European identity. Imperium art is not to be conflated with the concept of empire in the political context. Instead, it creates an existential location of cultural convergence where all our respective traditions are equally celebrated, cherished, and respected. Visually, Imperium art is best represented by the Norse berserker fighting alongside the Teutonic knight, the Celtic warrior fighting alongside the Roman legionnaire, the Hussite soldier fighting alongside the crusader, the Magyar horse archer fighting alongside the German man-at-arms, and so on. Imperium art is not a big tent movement, nor should it impose a myopic view on the understanding of European identity. Cultural and ideological associations, as well as historic context, are often not only divergent, but carry a long list of mutual grievances and even animosity among members of the European family. This is a reality one cannot simply sweep under the rug for the sake of imposing a new identity, for it will inevitably create the opposite reaction and defeat the purpose of Imperium art. Instead, an open and honest dialogue based on mutual respect must prevail within the existential realm. While some of these differences may never find resolution, the immediate collective threat posed by globalist elites and ongoing streams of migrant invasions must encourage all to understand the need to defend the greater good of European and white well-being all over the world. Imperium art represents truth in its idealism and unapologetically draws from Europe's past with a view toward a future with a clear concept, or Zukunftsbild. That's a future view. The message must appeal to all within the European biospirit and speak to their respective interpretation of identity by paying respect to every organic manifestation of European cultural and religious tradition. Imperium art represents unity of spirit, culture, faith, and identity through the existential plane of the Imperium itself, while openly rejecting parasitic movements and concepts that have sought to sever this continuity. Again, I gave you a mouthful, Mark, but I hope that it was I read it well enough that you could follow me.
No, it's very, very well written. I think the essay is absolutely excellent, and I really like the bit about the way the way the art collective is like having lots of different European tribes actually working together. They're all different. They all bring something different to the table, but them working together helps their collective chances of survival, despite them all being different. And I think that's something that's very, very important. And I think you see that very well in what Jeff's done. I mean, one of my favorite artists is Hyrith. Her music is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely inspirational. And unfortunately, she couldn't make the last show I did, which I was very disappointed about, because I always find it, I think it's a great pleasure when she appears on streams that I've been involved in. She's got an absolutely beautiful voice, and some of the songs that she's made, I can simply listen to them on repeat for what seems like hours. Absolutely brilliant. And you see somebody like Hyrith, and you listen to her body of work, and it is complemented so well by the artists that produce album art for the album, or the artists that produce the music that accompanies the YouTube videos. Because today, when we listen to music, and this is very interesting. When I was younger, obviously there was always album art. I understand that there was always art on the front of album covers, but we often didn't see that. And you might be thinking, what are you talking about, Mark? Did you buy albums that had no cases? Well, often when we were young, we didn't actually have the proper album. We would go to school and somebody would have an album, then they'd have it on cassette. I don't know how old you guys are. Do you remember those old cassette tapes?
I'm not allowed to tell you how old I am. Well, of course, I have several cassettes myself.
Well, so you do remember cassette tapes. So you must be.
I'm doxing myself.
You must be at least in your 30s.
Well, I have an old soul, but a young spirit. So that's where
old soul, but young spirit. Very good. But we used to go to school, and somebody would have a cassette tape with them, and that cassette tape would usually be a generic cassette tape that they'd recorded different songs to, and they would play it on their sort of Walkman, Walkman was a Sony brand. It would be a personal cassette player with headphones, and they'd often pass this around. And if you liked that cassette, you would say, "Oh, can I borrow your cassette?" Or, "Here's a blank cassette. Can you make me a copy of that?" And obviously, when you listen to songs on the radio, you could record songs off the radio onto cassette, and that was something else people would do. They'd wait for the song to come up on the radio that they liked, and they'd hit record on their cassette player, and they would record the song from the radio, and people would sit there listening to the charts on a Sunday afternoon, recording all the songs they wanted, and making their own sort of mixtape for free.
Yeah, mixtapes were cool.
From radio play. And obviously, when these things were being made, there was no album artwork. At best, you got a little white card insert that went in the cassette tray, and you'd list the songs on it, so you knew sort of the running order of your own mixtape. But there was no actual artwork. But today, the way people listen to music is fundamentally different. And I'm sure I'm not the only person, but I listen to probably more music on YouTube than I do on any other service. So I don't like services like Spotify. I don't like services like I don't even know any other services other than Spotify. People tend to use that for music, but I don't like putting money into the hands of globalist corporations. I don't like subscribing to services like Netflix or other streaming services. So when I listen to music, I tend to listen to it on YouTube. And I'm sure there's many people out there who sit working on a computer by a screen all day, and they select YouTube playlists. They build their own playlists of videos, which are essentially music videos. So I think today music, and this sounds a little bit odd, but music is more visual than it's ever been before, because when you have a YouTube video, there is either some form of music video that someone's put together, there is a static image, or there's a series of moving images that sort of fade into one another. And I think today, in that sense, music is more visual than it's ever been, because millions, if not billions, of people use YouTube as their primary way to listen to music. And that sounds strange because it's a video sharing site. And we've obviously seen the rise of music videos, but this is more than just the rise of music videos. You know, these aren't necessarily music videos in the traditional MTV sense. These are pieces of artwork that go with music or go alongside music and are specifically chosen to evoke feelings, to work with that music in a certain way, to dovetail with it. And when I'm watching these YouTube videos, or queuing them up to be watched as I'm working, I've got a 2-screen setup, and I often see wonderful pieces of artwork accompanying these compositions or these songs. And I think that's something that's really, really amazing, that we actually have not only wonderful musicians or wonderful singers like Hyrith, Olivia Key, people like that, but we also have these incredible nationalist artists who are producing a range of traditional and digital art that complements this music and works hand in hand with it. And you actually see that art as you're listening to the music. And then you get this incredible sort of double whammy of beautiful nationalist music complemented by beautiful nationalist art. And these art collectives like the Patriotic Art Community, the White Art Collective, are bringing these people together. They're putting them in touch. They're making these very, very important connections, which then go on to bear this incredible fruit, which is influencing people on a daily basis. And it not only inspires people within the movement, but I think it brings people to the movement as well.
Yes.
There are people who discover the music first, fall in love with the music, then look into the message, the lyrics behind the music, and they are drawn into our political sphere due to this uplifting and inspiring works of art.
Yeah, this is a conversation that it's an ongoing discussion among us artists in the White Art Collective and in the thinkers around us. The idea that, if you engage in a direct political discourse or debate with anybody, you're generally going to, you're either on the same side or you're not. And there's all kinds of obstacles, and, how we all know how that goes. But if you just say, hey, check out this song by Hyrith or Olivia Key or Donald Kent or this poetry show by Nullus, et cetera, it comes kind of at them from an oblique angle, and their heart, their emotions are open. They just see it as entertainment. And then that kind of Trojan horses our ideas in, and it reveals to them, it throws open the windows. Look at this beautiful world of white well-being, and you should be a part of this. It's not this crazy negative XYZ that you hear from all our enemies. So it really, the discussion about art versus propaganda is one of those ongoing themes that we kind of talk about. This discussion here now, there's so much going on between what you're talking about and what Nullus is talking about. I'm going to try to sort of recap some points here. One, again, to stick with the theme of the show, trying to find out how to integrate the arts, the movement, gain more power and traction, creating relationships with artists and business people. So your reference to Grandma Towler's tea is a fabulous idea. These other things. So in a sense, what I'm doing right now is making a call out to the business people in our sphere and people who are even thinking about starting businesses to come together and form their own collective, and be a partner with our collective so that we can start to create this, infrastructure, if you will, of our economy, a nationalist economy that can, of course, span different countries, right? We've got the internet, etc. So this is something that I think is the beginning of a whole new conversation, for perhaps another show. I'll have to perhaps seek different guests as well. But I think you're opening up some wonderful concepts here, Mark, and it's very, very helpful. So as far as what Nullus was talking about, that there's this thing about the Imperium. People are always, this is why we ask our guests usually to read the essay, or we invite people in our sphere to discuss and critique it. We invite critique of that essay and the concept of Imperium art, because it's, the idea is that we're not doing it ourselves. We're all co-authoring it together. It's our movement, and so everybody should have a kind of a say in, well, what does it mean and how does it work? And I'm so far, we haven't really had anybody who could completely, destroy it in any way. That everybody has had like different perspectives on it and brought their own ideas to the concept of the Imperium. But this is the thing that this show and the White Art Collective, et cetera, and what you do, Mark, as well, is creating a really, really strong sense of ourselves as Europeans globally, people of European descent. So there's still, like I said earlier, there's still some barriers, like language barriers, perhaps cultural and political barriers with, say, Western Europe and Eastern Europe or something. And we're working on that. These are future projects that we want to do. But using the arts as the cornerstone, or the kind of platform on which we come together, we socialize, we take a break from the world, we watch the D-Live shows of White Art Collective, check out the new music, see what's happening in the magazines, of course, visit all the different shows that are going on. I feel that the arts is, how do I say, it's for our mental and spiritual health. We are so submerged in toxicity in the news and our struggle against globalism, et cetera, that the arts really is kind of the medicine. It's, in a sense, the answer for that, I feel. So I wanted to kind of get your impression on that and see, where you're, what are the barriers to say bringing the arts more into our movement, and maybe some ideas that the three of us could jam on to improve that.
How can we bring the arts into our movement?
More.
I'm not actually sure about that. That's a difficult question. I think it's more of a case of bringing out the arts in our movement rather than bringing the arts to our movement.
Okay.
And that's an interesting concept
Mm-hmm.
in itself. What do I mean by that? Well, I think that bringing the arts to our movement will be very difficult, because there are, I think the arts, just like many other fields in Western society today, has been completely captured by the left, has been captured and co-opted by our enemies. And I was actually talking to Mrs. Mark about this today. I was talking about the police force, education, medicine, the church, all of these different sort of institutions have been largely captured by our enemies. They've been captured by people who hate us. They've been captured by those who want to see us done away with. And once these institutions are captured, once sort of like the church has been captured, we are then in a position where the church, instead of working towards uplifting us, working towards making us feel better, the church then works towards the very opposite. The church works towards destroying us, works towards undermining us. And I think that's very, very important to note. And I think the art community, the wider art community, are very much sort of in that category. You look at modern art today, modern art is absolutely degenerate, and I don't think it feeds the soul. I think in many ways it actually damages our people. So how do I address this? How do I address what you're saying? I think the first thing is we can bring out the artistic nature in our people. There are many people drawn to nationalism who are artistic, and they get here because they have concerns about, say, demographic change. They have concerns about demographic change. So they get to nationalism because they are concerned about the fact that we're going to become a minority, but they are an artistic person. And then by having groups like the White Art Collective, having groups like Patriotic Art Community, these people are then basically their artistic nature is brought out, and they feel at home, and they say, look, I came here because of this, but now I can express myself. Now I feel that I can. And I think that's happened with a lady in the UK called Jodie Kay. She's a musician, she's an absolutely wonderful woman.
Colett's friend. Yeah, we love her.
Yeah, she's absolutely incredible. And she came to our movement because she's had a political awakening. And then when she found it was a home for her art as well, and she could express herself through her art, she could express her politics through her art, that was absolutely fantastic for her. And I think that that's wonderful. I think that's very, very important. That's a way that we can bring the artistic nature out in people. And I also think there is a way we could potentially bring people to the cause with our arts. And that is if we produce wonderful art, if we produce wonderful traditional art that embodies the spirit of our ancestors, that makes people feel as if they're looking at something from the past, something from people's that they'll remember from their childhood, that they'll remember from significant events in their personal life. And that brings out or evokes an emotion in those people. Those people will come to us. And I think that's the way our artistic groups help our people. And also, I've spoken about this before, but nationalism is best when it is a community. Nationalism is best when it's more than just, say, a political party, when it's more than just going out, putting out leaflets, when it's more than just knocking on doors and talking about politics. Nationalism is important when it's making bonds between people, making friends. And I talked about this the other week on last week, in fact, on a lecture I did in Sweden. I did an hour and a half lecture on mistakes of the past and a way forward for the future. And when I was doing this lecture, I made this point that if you go out leafleting with somebody week in, week out, and then the political party or organization that you're part of has a problem or fractures or doesn't do well or starts doing badly, all of a sudden less people start turning up to events, less people come along, and you get this kind of downward cycle. And I called this the electoral boom and bust cycle, the electoral cycle. And you see this with parties. All parties go through booms and they go through busts. And I talked about the British National Party and how the British National Party was tied far, far too heavily to this boom and bust cycle. The British National Party was tied too heavily to the boom and bust cycle. So eventually, when the British National Party went through a bust cycle, what happened? Well, unfortunately, as the British National Party went through this bust cycle, people lost touch with each other. They didn't talk anymore. Why didn't they talk? Well, they didn't talk because the only thing they had in common, really, was the fact they were standing against demographic change. And they were part of the British National Party. And the only thing they did together was go out leafleting. But there are people that I have known since the early 2000s. The example I used was a friend of mine called Steve. And myself and Steve have known each other since the early 2000s. We met, I think, in around 2002. maybe 2001, and we've been friends ever since then, and we're still in touch today. Now, we met through nationalism, but very soon we discovered we had a shared love of the outdoors. We had a shared love of going out mountain biking, going hiking, going running, camping, going shooting, doing things like that. And we started doing things like that together. So we had been brought together through politics, but then we found other shared loves. And now, today, nearly 2 decades later, we are still friends. We're still in touch. We still do things together. Why is that? Well, the answer's simple. Because we found out we had more in common than just politics. We had more in common than just putting out leaflets. So we're still friends today. Now, I think the White Art Collective is very, very important because the White Art Collective brings people together and forms bonds between those people based on more than just a shared dislike of demographic trends.
Right.
And I think if nationalism goes through hard times, or if we hit bumps in the road, people who are brought together and are working together because they have a shared love of the arts are more likely to stay together, more likely to stay involved with nationalism because of that. And I think that is so, so, so important. And it's absolutely necessary that we build these deeper and stronger bonds with one another than just a shared dislike of something that is just a shared dislike of demographic change. I think that's so important. And I think the White Art Collective, the Patriotic art community, is doing that. And it helps not just broaden the appeal of our movement, but it helps build these strong bonds that keep people involved.
I can speak to that a bit because everybody's asking, well, what do we do? What should we do to change our destiny, our direction? But nobody's asking, what should we be? You see, and to, you and your friends, you have shared hobbies and likes because of who you are. What to be is that's the answer to the question. So here, that's what it is. The arts is celebrating who we are. We know who to be. We become ourselves. We become the Imperium. We become the kind of the torchbearers of our past and passing it on to the future. So it roots the movement deeper into being, European and being Western. It's in our blood. It's in our soul. It's in our spirit. It's in our culture. It's in our friendships. It's in our family, and it's in our arts. So I want to quickly hand it over to Nullus and let him comment on this.
Well, first of all, the first thing that comes to my mind are the armies of people out there who are lost, who are sadly not with us in our community, but hopefully will be someday soon. Those people who feel that something's wrong, something is not going the way it should be, that we live, some people say, an alternate reality, but whatever it is that they're trying to rationalize, that they know something is missing in the world that we live in today. And this comes back to this question of identity over ideology. Now, that's not to say that ideology isn't important, and it's also not to say that some ideologies are more positive toward our goals and others are less positive or more destructive. But it does say that I think the first, and this is what Mark, you hit on this, you hit the nail on its head with this one, because we need to focus on who we are. We need to focus on our identity, whether that's shared interests, whether that's shared values, whether that's shared experiences, whatever it is that brings us together and forms a community, a real organic community, is really the most efficient and the most effective way to maintain that community. And so we live in this digital age where it's very difficult to form real life bonds because your relatives, your friends, or your people that you thought were your friends think completely differently than you do. Your acquaintances would ostracize you if they, found out that you believed a certain thing, and which is unfortunate, right? But that's the reality of it as we stand. So we have to forge new relationships, or we have to find ways in which we can appeal to those people that we love, and try to bring them closer to us. And I think that another important point that you made, Mark, which I just wanted to circle back to, was to bring out the artistic nature from within our community. I think that is really what we are talking about. By bringing in the arts, I think what Donald was saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Donald, but you just want to incorporate that element into our organic reality. But the artistic creation has to come from us, and I think that that's an important point. Jody Kay is a classic and a beautiful example, and she's such a beautiful soul, just as a person. But then she's honest, and she's really going through a process that I think a lot of people can relate to, and I think that's very helpful as well for a lot of people who are unsure of themselves. So I'll just give the mic back to you, Donald. But I think that these are very important points.
Well, I think we've accomplished a lot today. I was wondering if Mark would like to make any closing statements or kind of encapsulate anything. I'd really like to know what your hopes are for the future, and what, maybe what you can imagine the future being with our art collectives in over here and over there. What's your take?
What's a final thought? Something I'll say about art, especially music. When our people, and when I say our people, I don't mean white people, I mean people involved in the nationalist community. When nationalists, those actively involved in securing a future for our people, are hard working for that, when we are out either campaigning, leafleting, when we're doing something toward bettering the nationalist cause, I often find that having this arts community, because we talked a lot about the way that art is spiritually uplifting, the way art actually makes us feel better about ourselves, makes us feel more positive. I think the art community in the future will be something that's much bigger, it'll be much stronger, and it'll be something that helps to inspire and maintain a sense of upbeat, positive morale within the nationalist community. This will be the soundtrack to the revolution, if you will. This will be something that will be in our people's hearts and minds. It'll be something that spiritually uplifts them. And you can never, ever underestimate the importance of art in inspiring people to do something fantastic. And we're inspiring people to take back their own destiny, to build a positive community, to fight back against this extremely powerful and all-encompassing system. And I've got to say this, as we do that and we look around ourselves at the world we're living in, the world of that is devoid of art, or where art has been replaced by soulless modern art, this art that the White Art Collective, that the Patriotic art community is creating, this art that we're creating is going to fill that void for many people and inspire many new nationalists and many old hands to doing greater things. And I think that is so very, very important.
Beautiful, beautiful. So where can people find you? I'd like to kind of close it out, and then I'm going to play a song, just because I feel, this is the mixtape of the revolution that we're creating here. So I would like to end on a positive song that's really energizing and kind of let people become who they are. But before I do that, I'd like to ask you to let people know where they can find you, Mark.
The best place to find me is on Telegram, on Gab, and you can also find me on BitChute and Odyssey. And I at the moment, we're having a few problems with BitChute. BitChute, unfortunately, are under attack at the moment. They're being heavily regulated. So please, if you're one of my regular BitChute viewers, make sure you're subscribed to me on Odyssey as well. That would be really, really helpful. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me on, and keep up the great work.
It's been just fantastic. I'm really, you know, I'm a huge, tremendous fan of yours. And, you know, all of us are really. So we owe you a lot. And I would say that it's people like you that brought me into the movement. And so, you know, I feel like this, in a sense, it's one generation to the next, you know, without doxing my age. But so I'm going to play a new song that I recently, it's just a live version of one of my songs. I put this video together the other day. And I want to say, God bless you, Mark. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you, Mark. Yes.
You're a tremendous,
Thank you for having me on.
You're a tremendous, tremendous inspiration to us. So God bless and keep going. Okay.
This is the age of heroes who will step up to the plate. Who tap the victory that I was getting laid. Sudden into the bar, obscuring our light. Don't be afraid to stand up for what's right. Some of us know the enemy, others deny the blues. If you choose not to fight, you choose to lose. The time for talk is over. We are the new Knights Templar. Reject the modern world. Become who you are. Become who you are. Ooh. Democracy is dead when they can always rig it. They call out the enemy and they call you a bigot. There was times of power here, not here in ours. We made a new world, made a new start. And I don't care what you say, and I don't care what you think. I've gone crazy living too long on the brink. The time for talk is over. We are the new Knights Templar. Reject the modern world. Become who you are. Become who you Imperium is coming. The future is ours. Imperium is calling. The future is ours. It's ours.